In the small town of Asheville, North Carolina, the life of Jack and Emily Carter, it seemed like something out of a fairy tale. Married for a decade, they were known for their unshakable union and evident love for each other and their 3 children. Ethan, 8 years old, Sophie, 6, and the little one Noah, just 3. The Carter house was always full of laughter, music, and games. Jack, a skilled carpenter, used to build toys and furniture for the family, while Emily, a dedicated teacher, turned simple moments into unforgettable memories. From the beginning of their relationship, Jack and Emily felt a connection that seemed to transcend rational explanations. "It's like we were destined to be together," they used to say. Their friends and neighbors often commented on the couple's synchronicity, as if they were 2 halves of the same whole. This compatibility was visible in every gesture, from the way they completed each other's sentences to the care they showed in creating a warm environment for their children. Jack and Emily's childhood, however, was a territory little explored in their conversations. They both grew up in orphanages and went through different foster homes. His memories of that time were fragmented and often painful. Therefore, they preferred to focus on the present and the family they had built together. They shared stories, but they had never actively searched for their origins, content with the life they had. One day, Ethan, the oldest son, brought home a school project about the family tree. The task required children to investigate their family roots and present a short summary about their ancestors. Although hesitant at first, Emily saw this as an opportunity to explore her own story and help her son understand a little more about his parents' past. "Maybe it would be good to know more about where we came from," she said to Jack, who agreed with a smile, although he looked slightly uncomfortable. Jack and Emily began investigating their origins with the help of a popular genealogy website, which allowed users to submit DNA samples for analysis and comparisons. The process seemed simple, and they were excited about the possibility of discovering unknown relatives or at least learning more about their genetic histories. They explained to Ethan that this was a chance to learn a little more about his roots, and the boy was excited about the idea. Collecting the samples was a relaxed moment. Emily joked about the possibility of discovering that she was a descendant of a famous family, while Jack, ever practical, said that all he wanted was to find an interesting story to share. When they sent the samples, they had no idea that the journey would lead to a revelation that would change everything. While they awaited the results, life continued its normal course. Jack continued working on carpentry projects, and Emily was busy with activities at the school where she taught. Ethan couldn't wait to show his family tree project to his classmates, and even Sophie and Noah started asking about grandparents and relatives they'd never met. For Emily, that moment brought a mix of emotion and nostalgia, a glimpse into a past she rarely allowed to surface. When the email with the results arrived, Emily was at home with the kids. "Jack, the DNA results are back," she shouted excitedly as he entered the room. They opened the computer together, unaware that they were about to unearth a secret that would call into question everything they knew about themselves and their family. The DNA report seemed harmless at first, with basic genetic information and data on ethnic origins. Emily was delighted to discover she had Scandinavian ancestry, while Jack discovered traces of Irish heritage that made him smile. "I guess that explains my love of beer and leprechaun stories," he joked, earning a laugh from Emily. But as they continued analyzing the data, something caught their attention. At the top of the list of relatives suggested by the site was a name that made the two look at each other with confusion. Closest relation. Biological sibling. Emily frowned and clicked on the name, which was listed as Jack Carter. "This must be a mistake," she said, trying to ignore the chill that was beginning to spread down her spine. Jack, equally confused, leaned in to get a closer look. I don't understand," he murmured. They reviewed the data several times, but the message was clear. The two shared 50% of their DNA, an unquestionable indication that they were biological brothers. Emily began to feel nauseous, while Jack simply sat back in his chair, his face pale and his eyes wide. The silence in the room was overwhelming, broken only by the distant sound of children playing in the yard. "That can't be true," said Emily finally, her voice trembling. "It must be some kind of error in the system." Jack shook his head, still unable to process what he was seeing. "We grew up in different orphanages," he said, trying to find some logic to explain the situation. "How could we be brothers? We've never met before." In the days that followed, doubt and confusion took over the house. Emily decided to contact genealogy website support to confirm the results. However, the response was devastating. The data had been verified and was accurate. With no other option, Emily and Jack began to research more about their pasts, searching adoption files and the records of the orphanages where they had grown up. The investigation revealed that they were both born in the same small town in Kentucky, just a few months apart. Their birth names were different, but records showed they were both put up for adoption after the tragic death of their biological parents in a fire. Jack, who was just 2 years old at the time, was adopted by a foster family before being taken to the orphanage. Emily, still a baby, was sent directly to another institution. As the pieces began to fall into place, reality became impossible to ignore. Jack and Emily were, in fact, biological siblings. The discovery was like a blow, shaking the foundations of everything they believed about their life and their relationship. "How did this happen to us?" asked Emily, crying on Jack's shoulder. He had no answers, just a lost look, as if the world had collapsed around him. Despite the pain, they decided they needed to keep the situation a secret until they understood how to deal with it. "The children can't know," said Emily firmly. Jack agreed, but the weight of the revelation was already starting to affect the dynamic between them. What was once a perfect marriage was now filled with uncertainty and uncomfortable silences. In the days that followed, Jack and Emily tried to continue with their normal routines, but the tension was palpable. Every time they looked at each other, the memory of the revelation hovered between them like a shadow. The love they shared seemed the same, but now it was tinged with silent guilt and a fear of the future. They both knew that no matter what decision they made, their lives would never be the same. After the devastating discovery, Jack and Emily tried to keep up appearances for the sake of their children, but the weight of the secret consumed them inside. The house, once full of laughter and harmony, now seemed suffocated by an awkward, uncomfortable silence. Playing with the children continued, but the moments of complicity between the couple were replaced by hesitant looks and long periods of introspection. Jack began spending more time in the workshop, immersing himself in woodworking projects as a way to avoid the thoughts that gave him no rest. He hammered and sawed with unusual intensity, as if the work could bury the emotional turmoil that consumed him. Emily, in turn, threw herself into her work at school, taking on extra assignments to lengthen her days and avoid the long nights of difficult conversations she knew were inevitable. "Are you okay, Mommy?" Ethan asked one night as Emily was preparing dinner. His innocent voice made her heart clench. "I am, darling." "Why the question?" she replied, forcing a smile. "You look sad," he said, with the sensitivity that only children have to perceive what adults try to hide. Emily couldn't respond, just kissed him on the forehead and changed the subject. Jack and Emily knew they needed to talk about what they were going to do, but every attempt to start a dialogue ended in frustration or tears. "We didn't ask for this," said Emily one night, after a long silence. "We didn't do anything wrong. But still, it feels like we are being punished." Jack agreed, but didn't know how to respond. He felt a mixture of unwavering love for Emily and crushing guilt that he couldn't articulate. The tension also began to affect the moments with the children. During a trip to the park, Sophie fell off a swing and started crying. Normally, Jack and Emily would have rushed together to comfort her, but that day they hesitated, each waiting for the other to act. It was Ethan who helped his sister, giving his parents a confused look. "What is happening to you?" he asked, bluntly. This question, although asked by a child, was a catalyst. Jack and Emily realized they were letting the secret erode the family environment they had worked so hard to build. They then decided to seek professional help to understand how to deal with the situation. They found a family therapist in Charlotte, North Carolina, who had experience handling sensitive and complicated cases. In the first session, both were nervous and hesitant. The therapist, Dr. Morgan Phillips, received them with a welcoming smile. "I know you are carrying something heavy," he said, But the fact that you are here is an important step. Jack and Emily began sharing their story, pausing frequently to hold back the tears and pain. Dr. Phillips listened intently, without judgment, and began to guide them in a conversation about their emotions. What you feel for each other is still real, he said. The emotional bond you have built cannot be undone by something beyond your control. But understanding how to deal with this will be fundamental to your family's future. The following sessions brought difficult and deep questions to the surface. Jack admitted he felt responsible for not investigating his past more before getting married. Emily, in turn, revealed her fear that this discovery could destroy everything they had built together. "I love you," she said in one session, looking at Jack with tears in her eyes. "But I don't know how to get over it." Despite the pain, conversations with Dr. Phillips began to give Jack and Emily the tools to face the situation with more clarity. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they were determined to protect their children while also finding a way to deal with the emotional impact of this revelation. Although Jack and Emily were beginning to process their emotions in therapy, the secret they shared was increasingly difficult to hide. The children's questions continued, and their closest friends began to realize that something was wrong. Linda, a longtime friend of Emily's, asked in a cafe, "Is everything okay between you and Jack? You seem so distant lately." Emily, surprised by the question, just mumbled something vague about stress at work. The lies and half-truths they began to tell to protect the secret weighed more and more. Emily avoided meeting friends, and Jack began turning down invitations to lunch with coworkers. They both knew that if the secret came out, they would be judged and perhaps even isolated by the community. The small town of Asheville was known for its hospitality, but also its penchant for gossip. In addition to the fear of social judgment, there was also the fear of how children would deal with the truth if they one day discovered it. During a conversation with Dr. Phillips, Emily admitted, "I don't know what's worse. Them growing up not knowing or facing the weight of this revelation." The therapist recalled that, regardless of the choice, the most important thing was the emotional well-being of the little ones. The pressure mounted when Ethan brought home an invitation to a school family day performance. "I want you two to be there," he said excitedly. Jack and Emily knew they needed to attend, but the idea of presenting themselves as a happy family amid their internal turmoil seemed almost unbearable. However, they decided to go, determined to put their children first. During the event, Jack and Emily did their best to look natural. They sat side by side, applauding as Ethan performed a poem about the importance of family. As they listened to their son's sincere words, they both felt a lump in their throats. "My family is my safe haven," Ethan said. "My parents teach me to be strong, and my brothers make me happy every day." That night, after putting the kids to bed, Jack and Emily sat in the living room. "I don't know how to go on like this," Emily said, her voice full of pain. Jack agreed. "We are trying to protect children, but we are destroying ourselves in the process." The conversation, although painful, brought to light the need to make a definitive decision on how to deal with the situation. As they pondered what to do, Emily received an unexpected text from Linda that said, "I'm here if you need to talk." For the first time, Emily considered sharing the secret with someone outside her family circle. She knew she needed support, but she also feared the consequences of exposing something so delicate. Jack, in turn, began to think about the long-term impact. "What if someone finds out before we tell them?" he asked Emily. The damage could be even greater. They both knew that to protect their family, they needed to be honest with themselves and others. But the question that tormented them was, how? With heavy hearts, Jack and Emily prepared to face reality. They knew that their love for each other was deep and true, but they also knew that the decision they would make in the coming weeks would have the power to shape not only their lives, but those of their children as well. The days following their conversation about facing the truth were even more tense for Jack and Emily. As they continued with their routines, the shadow of secrecy seemed to hang over everything. Every smile exchanged between them seemed filled with sadness, and the children's laughter, once a source of comfort, now only added to the weight of guilt. How can we be loving, responsible parents if we are hiding something so important? Emily asked the therapist during another session with Dr. Phillips. The therapist, with his characteristic calm, suggested that they begin to prepare a plan. Before you tell anyone the truth, he said, you need to be fully aligned and emotionally prepared for their reactions. You have no control over how others will react, but you can control how you face it together. The idea of planning a path gave Jack and Emily a little hope. As they discussed the plan, Emily suggested that they start by revealing the truth to someone they trusted completely. Maybe Linda, she said hesitantly. Jack, however, was afraid. What if she doesn't understand? What if it spreads? He knew that the truth was too sensitive and that the slightest mistake could expose the entire family to the judgment of the community. Even so, Emily decided to open her heart to Linda. One afternoon, she invited her friend home for coffee while Jack took the children to the park. Nervously, Emily started by telling her about the DNA research and how it all started as something innocent. When he finally revealed that Jack was her biological brother, Linda's mouth dropped open, unable to hide her surprise. "Oh my God!" Emily, Linda said. After a few seconds of silence, "That's a lot to process." Emily began to cry, explaining how this discovery had shaken everything and how she and Jack were fighting to protect their children. "We didn't know," said Emily, between sobs. "And now it seems like no matter what we do, someone is going to get hurt." To Emily's surprise, Linda responded with empathy. "I can't imagine what you're going through," she said, holding Emily's hand. "But what I see is that you and Jack are good people who love your children deeply. It doesn't change who you are as parents." The words of support were a relief to Emily, who, for the first time in weeks, felt like she wasn't completely alone. When Jack returned home, Emily told him about their conversation. "She didn't judge us," she said, with a shy smile. Jack looked relieved, but there was still concern in his eyes. "What if not everyone reacts like this?" he asked. "We can't expect everyone to be understanding." Emily knew he was right, but she felt that taking small steps was the best path. Meanwhile, the emotional impact of the revelation continued to manifest itself in unexpected ways. Jack began having insomnia, spending nights sitting in the workshop, surrounded by unfinished projects. Emily, in turn, began to emotionally withdraw from the people around her, fearing that any interaction would bring the secret to light. They were both exhausted, but also determined to face the situation together. The next big challenge would be deciding if and when to tell your children the truth. Dr. Phillips helped them consider different scenarios, but the fear of hurting Ethan, Sophie, and Noah was almost unbearable. "There's so little," Emily said, her voice full of anguish. "How can we expect them to understand something so complex?" Jack held her hand and replied, "No matter what happens, we will do this together." The conversation about telling their children the truth became the focus of therapy sessions and silent nights when Jack and Emily discussed the future. They both knew it was a matter of time before the children realized something was wrong. Ethan, with his heightened curiosity, was already asking questions that made the couple uncomfortable. "Why don't you and Daddy laugh together anymore?" he asked one day, as he helped Emily tidy up the kitchen. These little questions added to the weight of the decision they needed to make. Dr. Phillips suggested that they consider how the truth could be presented in a way that their children could understand. "You don't have to reveal all the details at once," he said, "but being honest at an age-appropriate level may be less harmful than you might think." Despite the advice, Emily and Jack were still hesitant. "If we tell the truth," said Jack, "they might start to see us differently. And that's something I don't know if I can handle." Emily agreed, but she also knew that the secret was eroding the family harmony they had built with so much love. "We are between the truth and the love we feel for them," she said, "and they both seem incompatible now." As they struggled with the decision, the emotional impact began to be reflected in the children's behavior. Sophie, who had always been outgoing, began to become quieter, while Ethan showed signs of anxiety. During a teacher meeting at school, Emily heard that Ethan had become more reserved in recent weeks, something that broke her heart. Jack, seeing the impact the tension was having on his children, finally decided they couldn't put it off any longer. "We need to do this," he told Emily, with a determination she hadn't seen in a long time. "We can't keep pretending that everything is fine. They deserve the truth, or at least some of it." Emily nodded, although her hands shook. With Dr. Phillips' help, the couple carefully planned how to have the conversation with the children. They chose a quiet afternoon, when Ethan, Sophie, and Noah were relaxed after dinner. They sat in the living room with the children curious about why they were so serious. "We have something important to tell you," Emily began, her voice soft. She explained, simply, that she had discovered something about her and Jack's past, something that showed they were more connected than they realized. "It doesn't change how much we love you," she said, with tears in her eyes. "You are the most important thing in our lives," Jack added, saying that, despite the difficulties, they would always be a family. Ethan, aged 8, was the first to react. "You're still going to be together, right?" he asked, his voice shaking. Jack and Emily looked at each other, unable to give a straight answer. "We will always be here for you," Jack said finally, "and we will do whatever is best for our family." Sophie, although young, seemed to understand that something serious was going on. She hugged Emily and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Noah, still too young to understand the situation, was playing with one of the wooden toys that Jack had made. For Jack and Emily, that moment was a reminder that, despite everything, their love for their children was the anchor that kept them grounded. As the children went up to their room, Jack and Emily hugged each other, both exhausted but relieved to have taken the first step. They knew the journey was far from over, but, for the first time, they felt they could face it together, for the sake of their children and for rebuilding the family harmony they valued so much. After the difficult conversation with their children, Jack and Emily realized that, although they had taken an important step, the wounds caused by the revelation were still far from healing. The house seemed silent in a different way now, as if each family member was processing the truth in their own way. Ethan, being the oldest, started asking more frequent and direct questions, many of which Jack and Emily didn't have the courage to answer completely. "If you are so connected, does that mean our way of being a family is wrong?" he asked one day as he helped Jack in the workshop. Jack paused for a moment, looking at his son. "No, Ethan," he replied firmly. "What matters is how much we love each other. None of this changes the fact that we are a family." But even as he said those words, Jack felt a knot in his stomach, questioning if he really believed them. Meanwhile, Sophie began to show signs of insecurity, asking to sleep in her parents' room every night. "I'm afraid you're going to leave," she said one night, holding Emily's hand tightly. Emily tried to reassure her, saying that nothing would make her leave her children, but she knew the words sounded empty, even to her. Noah, being the youngest, remained oblivious to the situation, but his energy and innocence were a small comfort amid the turmoil. The situation didn't just affect the home. At work, Emily began to notice that her productivity was declining, and colleagues were asking subtle questions about her distant behavior. Linda, the only confidant who knew the secret, did her best to support Emily as best she could. "You are one of the strongest people I know," she said in a cafe. "But you also need to allow yourself to feel and process all of this. Don't try to carry everything alone." Jack, in turn, began to avoid the casual encounters he used to have with other parents in the community. He feared that any interaction could lead to questions or comments that would reveal what they were experiencing. However, this isolation only made him feel more disconnected and lonely. During an afternoon at the workshop, he confided to Dr. Phillips, "Sometimes I wonder if we are doing the right thing by trying to keep everything as it is." Amidst the uncertainty, the couple decided to take a short trip to reconnect as a family. They chose a chalet in Blue Ridge Mountains, a calm and isolated place, where they hoped to find some peace. The idea was simple: spend time together away from external pressures and rediscover what united them. Ethan, Sophie, and Noah were excited about the idea, and their enthusiasm brought some lightness to Jack and Emily. During the trip, there were moments of genuine joy. They went on hikes, roasted marshmallows over the campfire, and shared funny stories from the past. In one such moment, while watching the children playing outside, Emily held Jack's hand and said, "We're still a family. No matter what happens, this will never change." Jack nodded, feeling a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. However, the trip also brought challenges. During an evening conversation, Ethan asked again about what exactly had changed in his parents' relationship. "Are you guys going to break up?" he asked, his eyes full of concern. Jack looked at Emily, and for a moment, neither of them knew how to respond. "We're doing our best to stay together," Emily said finally. "Because we love you and your brothers more than anything." That answer seemed to satisfy Ethan for now, but Jack and Emily knew they couldn't avoid those questions forever. The trip, although revitalizing, made it clear that the future was still full of uncertainty. When they returned home, they both committed to taking on the challenges one day at a time, putting their children first. Even with the ups and downs, the trip strengthened something important: Jack and Emily's determination to fight for family unity. Although the weight of the revelation was still crushing, they knew that as long as they stayed together, there was hope to overcome what seemed insurmountable. Despite Jack and Emily's efforts to keep the secret within the family, the complexity of the situation began to spill over into the outside world. During a school meeting, Ethan's teacher mentioned that he seemed to be dealing with something emotionally challenging. "He's more introspective than usual," she said. "Has something changed at home?" Emily, uncomfortable, said only that the family was going through a difficult time. These interactions began to worry Jack and Emily, who feared that the secret might be discovered. One night, as they were putting the kids to bed, Emily asked, "What if someone already knows? What if somehow this reaches other people?" Jack tried to reassure her, but he knew the risk was real. The fear of exposure became even more palpable when Linda mentioned that she had heard comments from some neighbors about Emily and Jack's more reserved behavior. "They don't know anything," assured Linda, "but people are realizing something is happening." Emily was grateful for the warning, but she felt panic rising in her chest. Jack, in turn, began to consider moving the family to another city. "Maybe we can start over in a place where no one knows us," he suggested during a conversation. Emily, however, hesitated. "This is the children's home," she said. "We can't just rip them away from everything they know. We need to find another solution." In search of a safer path, Jack and Emily decided to be more proactive in therapy. Dr. Phillips suggested they do a joint session with Ethan to help him express his emotions. During the session, Ethan revealed that he felt responsible for what was happening. "I brought that project from school," he said, crying. "If I hadn't done that, you guys would be happy." These words broke Jack and Emily's hearts, who immediately hugged him. "This isn't your fault," said Jack, firmly. "None of this is your fault. We are the adults, and it is our responsibility to work things out." Ethan, although still hurt, seemed relieved to hear this. While dealing with the internal repercussions, Jack and Emily also began to prepare for what could happen if the secret was exposed publicly. They discussed how they would react to questions from friends and how they would protect their children from possible judgments. "Our priority is them," Emily said. "If we have to face the world, we will do it together." The situation also began to affect the couple's relationship in unexpected ways. Despite the difficulties, Jack and Emily began to rediscover the strength of their emotional bond. "We fell in love before we knew all this," said Jack one night. "It means that what we feel is real, regardless of what the world says." Those words gave Emily a glimmer of hope, even though the future still seemed uncertain. As the weeks went by, Jack and Emily realized that while the journey was painful, it was also forcing them to confront deeper questions about love, identity, and resilience. They both knew the road ahead would be long, but they were determined to continue walking together, for the sake of their family and the love they shared. As the months passed, Jack and Emily realized that the secret couldn't stay hidden forever. Although the children were gradually adapting to the changing family dynamics, the couple knew the truth could come out in ways they had no control over. An unexpected visit from a worker at a former orphanage brought this fear to the surface. Sarah Collins, a retired social worker, had worked in the orphanages where Jack and Emily grew up. "I was going through some old documents and noticed a connection between you two," said Sarah, while having coffee with Emily on a casual date. "Did you guys know that?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. Trying to remain calm, she replied, "Yes, we found out recently." Sarah looked at her empathetically. "It must be a lot to process. But I know you have a beautiful family. This cannot be erased." Jack and Emily decided, after this meeting, that it was time to open up the game with a wider circle of people close to them. They started with Linda, who already knew the truth, and then invited other close friends to talk. "You are our dearest friends," said Jack, his voice firm but full of emotion, "and we want them to know the truth before they hear it from another source." The reactions were diverse. Some were shocked, others perplexed, but most reacted with understanding. Tom, a close friend of Jack's, was one of the first to offer support. "This is complicated, no doubt," he said, "but you are two of the most decent people I know. Don't let the judgment of others change who you are." Despite their initial support, Jack and Emily knew that not everyone would be so understanding. They decided they would keep the truth among a limited group, but would be prepared to deal with questions and reactions if the secret got out. This preparation brought a sense of relief, but it also made them more aware of the fragility of their situation. While facing these external difficulties, the couple began to prioritize moments of reconnection. They began hanging out together again, leaving the children with Linda or other trusted friends. On one of these outings, Jack took Emily to a park where they used to walk before the wedding. "I wanted to remind you how it all started," he said, holding your hand. Emily smiled, even though her eyes were full of tears. "I remember," she said, "and I still feel the same. It doesn't matter what happened, Jack. I love you." That conversation was a turning point for both of them. They began to realize that despite the complexity of their situation, the love they shared was real and worth fighting for. Dr. Phillips, who continued to guide the couple, suggested that they start thinking about the future more concretely. "You have a solid foundation," he said, "and the fact that they are facing this together is proof that they can overcome even the biggest challenges." Although the road was still full of uncertainty, Jack and Emily began to feel like they were ready for whatever came next. At home, the children seemed happier and more confident, especially Ethan, who was once again actively participating in school projects and activities with friends. Sophie began sleeping in her room again, and Noah, as always, continued to bring joy with his boundless energy. For Jack and Emily, seeing their children's resilience was a reminder that family love could overcome even the most difficult situations. Despite still feeling the weight of the secret, Jack and Emily decided that the love they shared was stronger than any external judgment. They were ready to continue facing the future as a family, even though they knew the answers wouldn't always be easy. The decisive moment came on a quiet day, while the family was gathered in the living room. Emily had received a letter from Sarah Collins, which included detailed documents about her biological parents' history. The papers confirmed what they already knew, but they also provided information that offered some comfort. His parents had made difficult decisions, but always with the aim of protecting their children. "They would do anything for us," Emily said, teary-eyed. This new perspective gave Jack and Emily the clarity they needed to make the most important decision of their lives. After months of therapy, reflection, and difficult conversations, they decided it was time to transform their relationship into something different. "We're still a family," Emily said firmly, "but we need to take a step to protect our children and our sanity." The decision to separate as a couple was made with regret, but also with a sense of purpose. Jack and Emily knew that although they loved each other deeply, the weight of the discovery was starting to take a toll not just on them, but on the children as well. "This isn't the end," Jack said, holding Emily's hand. "It's a new way of being a family." The transition was done carefully and planned. With Dr. Phillips' help, they explained to the children that although they were no longer a couple, they would continue to be devoted parents. "None of this changes how much we love you," Emily said during the conversation. Ethan, although sad, showed surprising maturity. "As long as we're still a family, I'll be fine," he said, hugging his parents. Linda and other close friends offered support during the transition. Jack rented a house nearby to ensure he could be present in his children's lives every day. Emily continued to live in the family home, and they both committed to maintaining a friendly and collaborative relationship. "We want them to know that love never faded," Emily explained to Linda. As time passed, the new dynamic began to work surprisingly harmoniously. Jack and Emily continued to attend school events and family activities together, showing their children that even though they were no longer together as a couple, they were still a united team. For Ethan, Sophie, and Noah, that was what really mattered. The final decision also brought a sense of peace to Jack and Emily. Although their love for each other never completely disappeared, they began to find happiness in new ways. Emily became involved in community activities again, while Jack began teaching carpentry classes to the city's youth. They both felt they were creating something meaningful, even in the midst of difficulties. On Ethan's birthday, the whole family got together for a backyard party. As they watched their children playing, Jack and Emily exchanged a knowing smile. "Look at them," said Emily. "Despite everything, they are fine." Jack nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and melancholy. "And that's all that matters," he replied. In the months that followed, Jack and Emily continued to navigate the complexity of their situation, but with a renewed sense of purpose. They knew they could never erase what they discovered, but they also knew they had the power to shape the future in a positive way. Although the journey was full of challenges, they ended with the knowledge that they had done everything they could to protect what mattered most: the well-being and happiness of their children. And deep down, they knew that, in a unique and complex way, the love they shared as a family would continue to guide them.